I'm going to try to keep this simple. The Calvin cycle now is actually way more complicated than what we're going to learn it. It's written almost always as this circle of arrows because what happens is it takes a molecule that's made out of a lot of carbons, or several carbons I should say, and it joins with carbon dioxide. It uses those energy molecules to make glucose, but then it always saves a few of those carbons to keep the cycle going. So coming out this other side, there are a few of the carbon molecules that aren't actually used to make sugars. They just keep things going, okay? So we're not going to go into the details of all of those chemical reactions, but you do need to understand that you've got a whole bunch of carbons pulling more carbon out of the atmosphere, turning it into glucose, but we have to keep the cycle going. We've got to have something for these carbons to bind onto before we can rearrange it into what we need. Anyway, so here's what we have. We have carbon dioxide coming into this cycle. We use ATP and NADPH. That's the energy that it's going to take to make glucose. Now, after we use ATP, ATP goes into the cycle, gets used up, then that ADP right here goes back to the thylakoid to get powered up. Remember, the thylakoid is where we power up ATP. So it's going to go back there to get powered up. At the same time, NADPH is dropping off those electrons. Remember, it's harnessing the energy of those electrons so they don't damage the cells. Delivers those electrons. Now it just drops them off. Now those electrons are also going to be used to build glucose. But then that NADPH is going to go back to the thylakoid to pick up more electrons. So I'm going to type this in here. I'm just going to put this in that these come from the thylakoid, and here they return to the thylakoid. Okay, we're going to get back to that. We're going to tie this all in here in a minute. But before we go through those steps of photosynthesis in that next worksheet, the one that we began last week, I also need to tell you that there's one very, 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 very important enzyme involved here. Just a quick backtrack. Enzymes speed up chemical reactions. So when we're speeding up chemical reactions, this has to happen fast. Because it takes 6 carbon dioxides to make 1 glucose. So this circle is spinning pretty fast, and it's happening all over in the stroma. And there's a very, very special character involved here. In fact, I'm even going to change the color of what I'm going to type because it's too important not to. This character is called, I'm going to change it here, Rubisco. Kind of like Crisco. We use Crisco when we cook with sugar. I don't know if that'll help you remember, but Rubisco is an enzyme, and this enzyme has a very special job. It's one of only 2 enzymes that I'm aware of. And I'm not the smartest person, but out of all of the photosynthesis that I've studied, I only know 2 enzymes that have the ability to break carbon dioxide apart and make that carbon usable to make glucose. So Rubisco is the enzyme that helps the plant break carbon dioxide, and then it uses all this energy to rebuild it into glucose. Okay? So now I want you to either push pause and take out the other worksheets, or just flip over to the other worksheets if you have them ready. I'm going to see if I can do that here. Let's see. So this is the worksheet that we were on before, okay? I'm going to leave that here. And then I think what I'm going to do is, hold on a second. Okay, I just wanted to get this picture next to the worksheet that we're filling out. Okay, so back to the worksheet. ATP and NADPH, we are no longer in the thylakoid, we are now in the stroma. Okay, so we're in the stroma. Maybe I need to change my ink color, make it obvious what I'm writing. All right, the light independent reactions, or in other words, the Calvin cycle, because we can call them either one. This one, just repeating, we're in the stroma. So the Calvin cycle takes place in the stroma. Oops, I'm sorry. I need to read what I'm writing. The Calvin cycle takes what out of the atmosphere? Carbon dioxide. So we take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. This is the big part of the Calvin cycle. We're turning carbon dioxide into sugar, right? So we're going to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Number 2. Now remember, we just talked about this. Blank is an enzyme that helps break down blank. Okay, this is where we were talking about this. This little guy right here, Rubisco. That's the enzyme, and we're breaking down carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide holds together really, 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 really tightly. And so it's going to take a special enzyme to break it apart. So we've got here, we've got Rubisco is that enzyme that's going to break down carbon dioxide. Make this all in one line. All right. All right, so now we are got Rubisco taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Rubisco has broken it. We have a special name for this. Making this carbon usable, if you remember from when we talked about the cycles. Remember we talked about the carbon cycle a little bit, and nitrogen. We talked about how we make things usable. We fix them. When you fix that carbon dioxide, it's not ready, so we fix it, right? So we call that fixation. So making carbon usable is like fixing it, so we call it fixation. So Rubisco helps with carbon fixation. So carbon fixation is making that carbon out of the atmosphere usable, which wouldn't happen without plants, because plants are the only ones that have Rubisco. All right. So now we've taken carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Rubisco has helped us break it apart, so now we can access that carbon. But now we have to put those carbons together in a new molecule. And anytime you build molecules, it takes energy. When we break molecules, it releases energy. When we build molecules, it takes energy. So it's going to take energy. So from here, we're going to take just the carbon. We don't use the oxygen. Remember, we don't use it. And in this case, oxygen kind of gets lost in some of these chemical reactions. But the plant doesn't use it. So we take the carbon. That's the piece we're interested in. We take the carbon molecules from carbon dioxide to build sugars. Now there are several chemical reactions that happen that involve rearranging of carbon molecules. We talked about that a little bit earlier. So here we have several chemical reactions in the Calvin cycle, rearranging those carbon molecules. That's where it takes, over here, remember, that's where it takes this ATP and NADPH. These are are involved in all of these chemical reactions that are going to make glucose eventually. Now, they are powered. Now, these reactions that are building glucose, they're going to be powered. They're going to be powered by ATP. Remember that guy? And NADPH, the one that's carrying the electrons. So essentially, ATP, which is the most common form of energy in cells, we're going to take ATP and a couple of electrons that are just being delivered by NADPH, and we're going to build glucose. So our ultimate goal over here is glucose. Now, we aren't done though, because these guys are now powered down, that ATP and that ADP and NADPH. So they are now used up. So they return to the thylakoid to get energized. So then ADP now, because now ATP is used up, gets turned into ADP. NADPH gets used up and gets turned into NADP plus. Now they have to return to where? Where do they get powered up at? Where do we power those molecules? At the thylakoid, because that's where we harness the energy of the sun. All right. Play through this if you need to again, if you need a reminder, but we're just going to kind of cover this one more time. All right, so Rubisco is an enzyme that can fix carbon dioxide and make it usable. So I'm going to put these in red. Rubisco can fix carbon dioxide and make it usable. So here we've got our carbon dioxide, ATP and NADPH from the thylakoid. Get used up. We take the energy from these guys. Now, these are the used up versions, so they go back to, and we talked about that, the thylakoid, to be, oops, I don't know what it's doing right there, sorry, to be powered, Alright, so ATP and NADPH that just got powered up in the light reactions get used to build glucose. Now they go back to the thylakoid to get powered up again. Then they'll come back and get used. And then they'll get powered up and they come back and get used. And so that's kind of a little cycle of its own. Okay. We'll come back and talk about the colors and the pigments in the next video. I wanted to mention that I planned on posting another video also of what we talked about last week with the light-dependent reactions happening in the thylakoid. I'm not going to get that done tonight. So before we move forward and before you have a quiz. I'll have that posted on my YouTube channel.